Hey, I'm Matt Manny. Thanks so much for joining me for this fourth session as we jump in here and we talk about how to deal with life when we feel helpless and hopeless. If you turn to session number 4 in your workbook, we'll go ahead and jump in there as we start talking about the session overview. If you looked at the story just a little bit and read the story there in the beginning, we talk about how this guy, Jean Blanchard, he took a hot air balloon ride in 1793 from Philadelphia over into New Jersey. And when he landed in New Jersey, the people were so shocked and surprised. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to do and didn't know what to say. But he produced for them, as soon as he got out of the hot air balloon basket, a letter signed by George Washington himself, who gave him permission and told the townsfolk, whoever they might have been, because they didn't know where Blanchard was going to go ahead and land, to go ahead and help him to go ahead and get his hot air balloon all packed up and to not attack him, basically. The idea is this: whether it's doing a hot air balloon ride or just life itself, we need hope to have lift in our lives. And whatever you might be going through, the whole theme of this study has been you are not alone. In Psalm 57, we're going to see a story about when David talks about how he felt just totally, extremely helpless and hopeless. Guy by the name of Hal Lindsey, if you look there in your notes on page 63, if you look at the quote there, he said, "Man can go 40 days without food, about 3 days without water, about 8 minutes without air, but only 1 second without hope." We have to have hope. We need hope to get through life. And so as you look there in your notes, we'll go ahead and turn to the opening session. If you haven't read Psalm 57 quite yet, go ahead and you can press pause and read Psalm 57. A little bit of the backstory there for us is that David, he had been captured by a scenario with the Philistines in Gath. He had been caught, and just kind of everybody around him was kind of going for him. His life was in trouble. People were criticizing him. There was so much turmoil in his life, and so there's an incredible amount of fear and worry and concern. And so David, what he does for us, as we saw in previous sessions, when we talked about Psalm 51, there's a backstory to every psalm that David talks about. So as we jump in here, let's go ahead and we'll look at the 3 times, first of all, that you need God's help, specifically as we find them from Psalm 57. We'll look there. Psalm 57, verse 4 talks about this. We need God's help when we're in difficult circumstances. When we're in difficult circumstances. In Psalm 57, verse 4a, it says this: "I am surrounded." Have you ever been in a situation where you felt totally, completely surrounded by, whether it's negative opinions of people, when you felt the pressure all around you, you felt stressed out, there just seemed like there's no way out? And sometimes folks who go through maybe depression or discouragement, sometimes even who struggle with suicidal thoughts, they go through moments where they feel like they're just completely surrounded. In Psalm 56, it's just a one psalm before, David writes in Psalm 56, verse 1, for the choir director, a psalm of David regarding the time the Philistines seized him in Gath, to be sung to the tune, "Dove on a Distant Oaks." Now listen what he says going forward. He says, "O God, have mercy on me, for people are hounding me. My foes attack me all day long." And so that was both figurative and literally speaking in Psalm 56 and Psalm 57 as he records these words for us and talks about how desperate he is and how difficult the situations he's going through. And so when do you need God's help? Well, when you have difficult circumstances. We see in 2 Corinthians, Paul echoes these sentiments when he writes these words: "We are pressed on every side by trouble, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but not driven to despair." In verse 9, "We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed." I like to say it around Greater Philly Church that we might be knocked down, but we're not knocked out. You may feel lonely, but you are never alone, that God is always and ever with you. Not only is it difficult circumstances that God helps us through and provides us some hope, but it's number 2, when you're in a demanding relationship. When you're in a demanding situation, a demanding relationship. We'll jump back to Psalm 57 now. We see this, verse 4, "I'm surrounded by fierce lions who greedily devour human prey, whose teeth pierce like spears and arrows, and whose tongues cut like swords." If you remember talking about the Psalms, we've mentioned before The Psalms are poems, they're songs to be sung, and these poems, they're very symbolic, very poetic. And so, were there literally lions? May have, possibly, but there could have also been many times David talks about his enemies, about people who are going after him, and puts them in very poetic terms. And so, most likely, we're talking about people who are criticizing him, and he constantly was in the midst of turmoil and scandal all throughout his position as king in Israel. And so constantly David had to deal with many helpless and hopeless situations. When it comes to dealing with these circumstances, again, Paul reiterates, he says, but if you always are biting and devouring one another, watch out, beware of destroying one another. And sometimes in our relationships, when they're extremely demanding and stressful, we can get so frustrated to the point that we kind of knock down everybody else around us by the comments we make, and just by, we cut off those relationships, we burn bridges, if you will. And eventually, if we shoot down enough people around us, we'll find that we're the only person left standing. And that can be a very lonely and very desperate situation to be in. And those are the times that we need to call out to God. But not only in difficult circumstances, demanding relationships, but also when we're stressed out, in just a stressful mindset. Well, look in verse 6, he says, my enemies have set a trap for me. I'm weary from distress. They have dug a deep pit in my path. He goes on to say, but they themselves have fallen into it. And all of a sudden now you can begin to see that he says that there's kind of God's shown up a little bit in my story. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 3, look at what Jesus describes there. Think of all the hostility that Jesus endured from sinful people, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. To think about what Jesus went through, what Jesus had suffered, it's an encouragement for us. If you've ever read a great story or seen a great movie, it's very inspiring to see somebody who goes and gets through all the odds when they're stacked against them, and they push through it, and they persevere, they endure through it, and it gives us encouragement to see that if they can do it, we too can do it. And our motivation to get through difficult, helpless, hopeless times is to fix our mind, to look to Jesus as our example of encouragement, who he endured, and because he got through, that we can get through as well. As you look then and we transition, that how can we find God's help when we're hopeless? How can you find God's help when you're hopeless? Number one is this, from Psalm 57, look for God's protection. With each one of these points, we're going to be looking for God's protection in these helpless and hopeless situations. Psalm 57, verse 1, have mercy on me, O God. Have mercy. I look to you for what? Protection. I look to God for protection. Now remember, mercy and grace are two close concepts, but they're different. Grace is God giving me more than I deserve. Mercy is God giving me what I do, not giving me what I do deserve. Mercy is God not giving me what I do deserve. If someone makes a mistake, what do they deserve? Well, they deserve correction. If someone sins, what do they deserve? Well, they deserve consequences. If somebody commits a crime, what do they deserve? Well, they deserve to be arrested. And so when we look for God's mercy, we say, God, I've done wrong, as we've seen over the last two sessions. God, I need your mercy. I need your forgiveness. I need you not to allow the consequences to bear down on me in those helpless and hopeless situations. But then the second way is hide in God's protection. So we look for God's protection, but we also hide in God's protection. Look what verse 1 goes on to say. He says, I will hide beneath the shadow of your wings until the danger passes by. I will hide behind the shadow. Psalm 27 unpacks this a little bit for us. It says, wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. The encouragement for us is this, is sometimes when it comes to helpless and hopeless situations, we don't like the pain. We want to get out of it as soon as possible. We want to escape the pain. And yet it's in those moments that many times when we want to run, it's the very moment we need to lean into God and trust God and hide in the shadow of his wings. Well, what is that? That sounds very poetic. What does that mean? Sometimes it means we just got to press pause. If you're tempted to make a quick decision, you need to press pause. If you find yourself, if you go into, and we've all been in this scenario, there's a high pressure sale. Hey, you got to get this product, you got to get this piece of furniture, you got to buy this car, you got to get this piece of property, you got to get it today, now. It's high pressure sales. And one of the encouragements that I've always heard and always kept with me, if somebody's pressuring you to make a sale, or pressuring you to buy something, wait 24 hours and then consider it. But don't ever make a quick, high pressured, financial decision in the moment, because it's like going to the grocery store when you're hungry. What do? You buy a bunch of junk food that you don't need. You just end up getting yourself in trouble. And so when it comes to when you're in a helpless, hopeless situation, that's the worst time to do something. You can jot this down in the margin of your notes. Don't make any major decisions. Halt. Don't make any major decisions when you're H, when you're hungry, A, when you're angry, L, when you're lonely, or T, when you're tired. Halt on making any major decisions when you're hungry, when you're angry, lonely, or tired. And all you need to do, get a bite to eat, have a good meal, calm down from your anger, spend some time talking to a close friend, and get some rest. And then you'll have a clarity of mind to go forward from there. But that's what it means to hide, to wait on the Lord, hide in the shadow of his wings. Not only do we need to hide in God's protection, but ask God for protection. Verse 2 says, I cry out to God Most High. To ask God. Psalm 86 verse 5 says, O Lord, you are so good, so ready to forgive, so full of unfailing love. Underline that in your notes. Unfailing love for all who what? Ask for your help. So we ask God for help. Then number 4 is this. Trust God for protection. Trust God to protect you. It's tough because David initially started out and talked about how these lions were around him. Their teeth were sharp. They were biting and cutting. And so we have to trust in God for his protection. We'll jump to Psalm 57 verse 7. He says, my heart is what? It's confident. Confidence is trust. I have confident trust in God. Psalm 52 verse 22. We're going to hit some great verses here. Give your burdens to the Lord, and he will take care of you. He will not permit the godly to slip and fall. Isaiah 41 verse 10. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. Lamentations 3:25-26. The Lord is good to those who depend on him. Underline the word depend. To those who search for him. Again, that goes back to that idea of asking. Verse 26, so it is good to what? Wait. That goes back to hiding in God's protection, quietly for salvation from the Lord. We find there with each one of those circumstances that there is this rolling reiteration of waiting on God, asking God, hiding in God, pressing pause, being patient, that God will help us. Now here's the deal. This is difficult. Let me put it where it is. I've never seen God, and you've probably never seen God. The understanding is this: we can't see God. It's God is invisible. He's immortal. He's forever. From the Old Testament, we know there's a story of Moses, and he says, God, show yourself to me. I want to know you, to be able to see you. Prove yourself. And God says, fine, I'll reveal myself. And so he hides him in the cleft of a rock. He hides him in the front of a cave, and God overshadows so Moses can't see, because God says, if you see me, you're going to die. And all that he gives Moses is the glimpse of the back of God. That's all he gets. We go to the New Testament, and Jesus says, if you want to know God, you want to see God, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And the understanding is this, that we need to come back to this point of we have to trust God. Even though we can't see God, we make decisions based on the fact that we trust God. Now, not only is it we ask, hide, and trust in God's protection, but we thank God for protection. Verse 9, we thank God for protection. I will thank you, Lord, among all the people. I will sing your praise among all the nations. Do you see the transition now in his talk about how he describes God's goodness? We'll look at verse 5. Be exalted, O God, above the highest heavens. May your glory shine over all the earth. Listen to how his tone, his attitude has changed. Look at verse 11. Be exalted, O God, above the highest heavens. May your glory shine over all the earth. He reiterates. This is kind of like in a song. This is the chorus of the song, both verse 5 and verse 11. He reiterates the same words, same exact phrasing. It's the chorus to this song. And so he says there, I will sing of the Most High God. I will sing and give praise to God. And so what we find there is, you look, we see this. He says, God, my focus is on you. When I feel helpless and hopeless, my focus is on you. But then that takes us to the next point, is this: how God helps me when I'm feeling hopeless. How does God help me when I'm feeling hopeless? Number one is this: God works out his purpose in my life, in your life. He works out his purpose in your life. Psalm 57 verse 2. B, God will fulfill his purpose for me. And underline that word. God will fulfill his purpose. He has a plan and a purpose in the midst of our pain. God never allows pain in our lives without it having a purpose. Number 2 is this. God controls the limits of your circumstances. God puts limitations. God doesn't let it be a free-for-all. Read the story of Job. God has a man who he believes has integrity and honors him and loves him, and Satan gives us this, we get this picture from the writer of the story of Job talking about Satan now, and they pull the curtain back and we see Satan approaches God, and Satan says, he only loves you because you're good to him. And God says, listen, you can take it all away. You just can't kill him. You can touch his health, you can touch his wealth, but you cannot kill him. God put limitations. He says, that's pretty scary limitations. It is, but there are limitations. Let's look at some scriptures. We see this, 57 verse 3. God, he will send help from heaven to rescue me, disgracing those who hound me. I love that word hound. It sounds like a you dog, you hounded me. If we go to the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. So it's not like you've got this unique situation that nobody's ever faced. Other people have faced it and they've gotten through it as well. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be greater, more than you can stand or what you can handle. God won't let you go through something that will cause you to not be able to, with his help, get through it. And then we find this. God never stops loving you. The most encouragement I can give you in this session is this, that God, he doesn't stop loving you. Look what David writes about in verses 3 and 10. My God will send forth his what? Unfailing love and faithfulness. Never stop loving you. Verse 10, for your unfailing love is as high as the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches the clouds. God will never stop what? He'll never stop loving you. And then we find number 4 is this. God cares for you faithfully. His unfailing love, it's forever faithful. Verses 3 and 10, God will send forth his unfailing love and what? Faithfulness. And again, we see that verse again. You see this reiteration. Unfailing love and what? Your faithfulness reaches to the clouds. So not only is it love, but throughout the scriptures, it's always God's love and his faithfulness. Look at Lamentations again, 3 verse 22 and 23. But the faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin what? They begin afresh each morning. Faithful love. You can underline that phrase there. God's faithful love. As we come down the home stretch, I want to give you just a brief anecdote that sunrises are rare. Sunrises are rare. You say, well, what do you mean by that, Matt? Sunrises are rare. There's this understanding that most people, just about everybody, is up when there's a sunset. We come to the end of a day, unless you work third shift, but when you come to the end of a day, most people, they'll see a sunset. They'll see the sun go just over the distant horizon and it'll disappear in the darkness, and you'll see the beautiful colors of sunset. But most people, the sun will rise before they get up in the day. For most people, they don't awake to the dawn. They don't get up before the sunrise happens. And so for many people, sunrises are what? Well, they're rare. And the understanding is this. Many people, they just see their life as continually, it's just, this is the end of a thing. This is the end of a thing. This is the sunset. This is the end of a relationship. And they feel helpless and hopeless. But what if we begin to see life as sunrises and not sunsets? Begin to see life, it's the sun rising upon the goodness of what God's going to do in my life. Sunrises are hope for what's to come for the day. Sunsets are the ending of a thing. Sunrises are the beginning of a thing. And so as we consider and we come to talking about being helpless and hopeless and feeling lonely, realize that God has hope for you, that God is surrounding you with his love, that God will never fail you. And when you feel the struggle and the strain and the stress of the pressures around you, come back to these words, because of all these things you say, but I can't feel it, I can't see it. God loves you. That'll never change. And you and I need to be reminded of every day and every moment of his love. We'll look at this last statement for us as we wrap up. I can trust God with confidence to help me in my most difficult circumstances. I can trust God to help me in my most difficult circumstances. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Enjoyed our time together. We'll get together back in session 5 as we continue to talk about how God is forever with us and that we are never alone. Thanks for watching.